People say I talk about some weird stuff, some far out stuff. But how about that chair that you're sitting in isn't solid? How weird is that? This reality is nothing like we think it is.
When I saw what Icke is doing, I was a bit jealous on him. Wow, look at what this guy's doing.
I don't know if anybody else could do it but him, actually.
We are in a period now where speaking your truth is not just important, it's utterly crucial to where humanity goes from here. The world needs renegades.
Julian Assange, why is he being targeted and what's in store?
Well, I've spent 30 years connecting dots, and what you learn is nothing happens in isolation. To understand the true nature of an individual action, an individual situation, you have to understand what it's connected to, because it's not a pixel, there's a picture there, and you just have to find it. And I have this phrase I use: know the outcome and you'll see the journey. If you know where we're being taken, then the steps and the changes and the events that are leading to that outcome become very clear. See, I can see where this is going. But if you don't know the outcome, then those same happenings appear to be completely random and have no pattern. So what is going on? Oh, it's just this Assange bloke. He's been arrested for running away to the Ecuadorian embassy, and he was doing something the Americans don't like, so they want to extradite him and all that stuff. And it seems to be a single event. It's not. If we go back to know the outcome and you'll see the journey. What is the outcome? The outcome that we're being taken to, which brings in so many other dots of topical current interest and happening, is to a position where no one will ever see anything or hear anything that is not officially approved. That's the goal. Now, what we're seeing is the movement towards that. And of course, the Silicon Valley hysteria of censorship is taking us towards that so fast, day after day after day, whereby anything outside of the official narrative is now hate speech, fake news, and any other label that they come up with, and there'll be many others. And of course, within that concept of only seeing and hearing whatever the authority wants you to see and hear, we then see why freedom of speech in general is being targeted. In everywhere you look, it's being targeted. Because if freedom of speech survives in any form, they can never reach the point where they can control everything that people see and hear, because free speech can challenge it. So that's why free speech is being targeted on the scale it is. So then you look at what Assange has done with WikiLeaks. First of all, he has, through that organization, revealed through leaked documents, emails, etc., the truth that some of us have been putting out for a long time is that the American government would give psychopaths a bad name. They'd probably sue for defamation of character. And we've seen civilians in the Middle East shot for a bit of fun, basically, on camera. We have seen how politicians have said one thing to our face, and something very different was going on in the shadows. So if we, again, go back to this concept of controlling everything that people see and hear, the last thing they want is for someone like WikiLeaks and Assange to reveal what they absolutely don't want people to see and hear, which is what they're really doing. So how do you stop that? Well, you can censor, yes, up to a point, But you've also got to discourage anyone else who would have in mind doing anything like the same. So this is an old trick, an old technique. You target someone, usually an individual, and you make an example of them. You target them in an extreme, over-the-top, psychopathic way, because what you're doing is you're not just targeting Assange. You're saying to anyone else that might think of doing the same, this is what happens when you take us on. And so there's many elements of what the old Assange story is, but that is absolutely prime, which is terrifying anyone else going down the same road. And we see this same principle with freedom of speech. What you do, you don't just censor, you target people talking in ways that the system doesn't want people to hear or accept, with endless abuse, so that people then start to come into the most insidious, the most fundamental of censorship, which is self-censorship. Instead of someone saying something and there be some kind of debate about it, it's just never said. And what does that mean? Increasingly, as more and more people say, well, I better not say that because what are the consequences, which is what people are doing now, you're step by step getting closer to a point where people only see and hear what the authorities want us to see and hear. And when my next book comes out, which is a big update on Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center disaster, it's called The Trigger. It's coming out on September the 11th, which might give you an idea what's a great chunk of it's about, but it's not all about that. They will see that actually I don't give a shit what they do to me, throw at me, abuse me with. I couldn't care less. And that's the energy we need, because as long as people keep thinking consequences, what are the consequences for me of doing this or saying this? And people think, oh, the consequences, they're too much for me, I don't want that. We're walking down the road to complete silence of anything outside the official narrative. And that's very dangerous, and we must not bow to that.
So they've made an example out of Assange. This has been going on for time immemorial, like the death of Socrates, the gadfly.
Yep.
Trump said, I love WikiLeaks. And now Trump and the US are trying to get Assange extradited, could possibly serve a life sentence in America.
Yeah.
How does Trump reconcile that? And what do you think will happen to Assange if he ends up in the States?
Well, they won't throw the book at him. They'll throw the library at him, and most of it will be made up. And the thing about it, too, is crucial to destroying freedom of speech and allowing things like that to happen, is to have a media that's not only owned by the cabal that's ultimately behind all this, because you control information, you control perception, you control behavior, you control human society. It all comes from information. That's the start of that sequence. So this is why they want to control information everywhere, totally. But it's not just that the media is overwhelmingly owned by these people. It's that what people bravely call themselves journalists, who actually have the nerve, the audacity to put journalist on their tax form, they have backbones that start vibrating at the very thought of taking on the system. And so instead of standing up in unity for their own freedom of speech, which is obviously all tied in to what they're doing to Assange, what they're doing to him could equally be applied to any news organization or any journalist, because proper journalists basically do the same. They uncover what the authorities don't want uncovered. That's the real foundation of a journalist, telling the public what the public wouldn't otherwise hear. Instead, we have a journalistic profession that tells the public what the system and the authorities want them to hear, which is the very inversion of journalism. But even even from that perspective, the extreme of potential consequences for mainstream journalism, what survives of it, of what they're doing to Assange, even that has not rallied them to stand up and say, we're not having this. Because in the end, journalism, and I worked in journalism, mainstream journalism, for a long time in newspapers and radio and television. In the end, what motivates most journalists is not the pursuit of truth and the exposure of deceit and the abuse of power. It is, I've got a mortgage to pay. That's the motivation. So it's like, oh, well, if I cross the line, I might lose my job and well, you know, I've got a mortgage to pay. But what these journalists don't realize is while their backbones vibrate and they sit pondering over the next mortgage payment, their very profession is being dismantled. And what is happening to Assange is part of that dismantling of that profession. We are, I saw some figures the other day about the number of journalists who are losing their jobs around the world because all the information is now being put onto the internet. Newspapers are going out of business. Television companies are losing. If you just take that off, somebody's trying to call me. Newspapers are going out of business. The television stations are vastly losing audiences, and it's moving on to the internet. It's moving on the internet systematically for a very simple reason. Once you get information on the internet, you can algorithmically censor it without any human input once the codes are in there. That's what it's being done for. Why have they created monopolistic organizations like Google with the search engine and Facebook and these others to be the very focus of the communication of information? Because that's the way they're going to control it totally. You know, the algorithms that don't just delete a post when it's posted, but stop it being posted. That's where it's very close to going. And so you put all this together, and Assange is a very significant element in all that. And the journalists look on, and they say, "I've got to pay my mortgage on Thursday." Truth? Got to pay my mortgage on Thursday, and that's how it goes. That's how it goes. And unfortunately, they're going to reap the whirlwind. Many already are.